Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today for the first year library experience, best practices and new directions. Growing in emphasis lately, the first year experience has been designed to create new, more meaningful opportunities for first year students, and to support this initiative, academic libraries, of course, have been developing key initiatives. Today you'll hear from two first year experienced librarians about their methods, best practices, and new directions in this space. Before we begin, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items. First off, I want to make sure that you can hear me. So if you can hear me, please use the raise hand option located in your control panel. Great, thank you. There will be a recording of the webinar shared via email within 48 hours. And at the conclusion, there will also be a short survey that pops up on your screen. If you don't have the time to complete it after the webinar, no problem. The survey will also be shared with you in your follow-up email. So to get started, I'd now like to introduce you to our presenters for today. We have Raymond Pun, first-year student success librarian at California State University, Fresno, and Meggan Houlihan, first-year experience and instruction librarian from NYU-Abu Dhabi. So she gets an extra gold star today for staying up super late to speak with us. So I'll hand it over now. So thank you, Ray and Meggan.
Thank you, Olga, and thank you all for joining this presentation. We want to thank all of you for just making time to hear what we have to say. Really like to thank Credo for organizing this and giving us this platform to really speak about the first year experience and how we can really build on this support for across the campuses, across the US and wherever. So again, my name is Raymond Pun. I'm the first year student success librarian at Fresno State. I support first year students, transfer students, as well as student affairs programs in dream centers, career centers, and student success programs.
And my name is Meggan Houlihan, and I'm the first year experience and instruction librarian at NYU-Abu Dhabi. And unlike Ray, I solely deal with our first year students.
And what's interesting I do want to make is that Meggan and I, we've had this discussion that there's a hyphen in the first year. My position does not have a hyphen. Hers does. I think we've seen this inconsistency going on. Would you agree, Meggan?
I would agree.
So what we wanted to talk about is where is everyone from? I think if you have the chance to just type it in, feel free to do that.
We would just like to know where our participants are, just so we can get a quick synopsis of who we're talking to.
I know for a fact that we've had over 200 registered attendees, so it's really interesting to see where everyone is located, and perhaps this is something that could tell us the interest of the FYE across the US. Unfortunately, I can't see some of the responses, but can you see it, Meggan?
So we have California, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Washington, Canada, all over the place. So that's really exciting for us.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. We really want to make this a interactive discussion and really to hear some of your thoughts too throughout this presentation. And I know I want to shout out to some of my colleagues at Fresno State. They're upstairs on the 3rd floor listening to me while I'm in my office. So kudos to them, and we're going to get started. So today's webinar will focus on 3 key points. One is on orientations, and we know that it is very important to make that first impression. We'll share some of the best practices that we've seen across the academic libraries and what they've been doing to do that. And the next important part comes in instruction. We know that information literacy is keystone to the first year experience for student retention, student engagement, and developing those critical skills needed for student success. And we'll get into some of the programs. How do we create engaging programs to support these kinds of learning environments that first year students need to thrive in? And then finally, we'll talk about assessment, which is very important and a hot topic to consider. How do you explore and assess first year students and their learning abilities and how they transition into the academic life? So we have the first poll I think we have Credo, they will be launching it. The question is, are you involved in your institution's first year experience program? So you can select the following. So you can say, yes, I'm involved, or no, I am not involved. And if your institution does not have a first year experience program, feel free to, you can say no. Because I know a lot of institutions might not have a first year experience program. Okay, I am still unable to, okay, here it is. So there are about 75% yes, I'm involved, and 25% no, I'm not. That's a really good number. So I'm going to head back to, whoops. I'm going to, hold on one second. There it is. So we want to talk about this kind of important question on high-impact practices, which comes into the whole first-year experience and if you're involved. And so high-impact practices are really interesting because they are, in case you are not familiar with them, are defined by the Association of American Universities and Colleges. They define their techniques designed for teaching and learning to really create an engaging environment for students that benefit them for learning in all kinds of backgrounds. So this came from the AACU, and so one of the interesting things is that they have different kinds of high-impact practices, not just for first year, but throughout the undergraduate experience. So these are just some of them that all of them actually, they did this analysis, able to pull it out. So community-based learning, first-year seminars, which I think is something we all are familiar with, undergraduate research, and so forth. And what is interesting is that for us, we see these are the common points, the touching points that first-year experience students should be involved in, and how the library can really promote, collaborate, and engage with different partners to facilitate them. So we'll be talking about how perhaps you can create collaborative learning assignments to supporting write-intensive courses and really building those learning communities. But I encourage everyone to look into the high-impact practices because they really can give you the strategic direction of where you want to be supporting first-year students in your academic library. So we'll be talking about the first-year orientation. I'll leave this to Megan.
Thanks, Ray. So to begin with, I would just like to let everyone here know that Ray and I recently co-edited the first-year experience cookbook published by ACRL. And what we found is when we put out our call for papers, in our minds, we thought library orientation was very important. But when we received the proposals, there was an overwhelming majority of proposals that were related to the first-year orientation. And to us, it clearly signified that this is such an important role of librarians in the first year. This is our first point of contact with students, and we really want to make it worth it. So what did we hear from our proposals and those who made it into the publications? Overall, first impressions count. It doesn't matter what you do, everyone wants to have a positive start to their library experience, and librarians really go out of their way to make sure that students feel comfortable and welcome in the library. Another thing that we saw when we were looking over our proposals is that you really need to consider your student body, that there is not a one-type-fits-all library orientation. You have to consider your student body. Are you working with transfer students, international students, distant learning students, untraditional students, veterans, etc.? Who are you working with? And you have to design a library orientation that best suits them. One of the third things we noticed while we were looking over all this material is that librarians really need to start considering maybe participating in more community outreach. Think about collaborating with maybe local public libraries, summer bridge programs, and upward bounds programs. Ray and I will also be speaking at ACRL at the Credo booth about the recent Library Journal and Credo first year survey. and we saw some very interesting results related to librarians' anxiety about their student bodies. So participating in community activities might actually help eliminate some of this librarian anxiety about our incoming students.
Thank you, Meggan.
So what we're also going to talk about is what are some of these really innovative practices that we have seen in the first year orientation. And this kind of strays away from your typical, here's the library, here's your flyer, here's our business cards, come ask us a question. You'll see things like scavenger hunts. Now, scavenger hunts have been popular for quite a while, but you start to see libraries using different apps such as Goose Chase and things like that, where your students are able to input answers and take selfies. We also heard from a lot of librarians who really just want to make students feel welcome in the library, and they just invite students in to participate in fun activities such as photo booths. We've even heard from libraries that invite therapy dogs in. I don't know about you, but if there's dogs in the library, I'm just not sure that anything else would be more attractive. You'll see a lot of opportunities for mascots to come in, games and prizes. So librarians are really trying to be innovative to create better student engagement.
And one of the things we found is that in the surveys and from our own work, a lot of students, they want to be engaged. I think there is this dull moment when we think of orientation, but it doesn't have to be dull. It could be very exciting to bring in all of these community partners to support student orientations in terms of what the library can offer and make students feel really comfortable to identify the library as a space for their learning, for their research, or for their personal developments, because that's what the library is for, to make that comfortable space for the sense of belonging. And so I put in here the quotes, the first year, as Meggan alluded, it's actually any first year person. It doesn't have to be actually a first year student, but could be a first year international, veterans, and so forth. So something to keep in mind. So now we're going to...
Also, yep. Sorry to interrupt, Ray made a really good point just now. And it's the first year library orientation does not just have to mean engagement in the library. You can collaborate with on-campus partners to enhance your library orientation.
Yep, that's a good point. And because of that, there are a lot of opportunities, and here are just some of them we'll be talking about. But before we get into the second part, we have another poll. So this is the second poll. If you have a moment to just answer this question, what is your favorite library instruction tool? So we have LibGuides, Padlet, Google Drive, Kahoot. And for those who are not familiar, we've mentioned Kahoot, which is really a like a gamification tool where it's multiple choice and it's based on timing. So students have to sort of respond to it right away. And Padlet is a really awesome tool. You can look it up right after the presentation to see how useful it could be. So take a couple of more seconds and then we'll see what are the results. Okay, we have LibGuides, very popular for instruction, at 56%. Coming next is Other, so that could mean any other things besides this list. Kahoot is on the list as well, Google Drive. So when we say Google Drive, we also mean Google Slides, Google Doc, Google Spreadsheet, and Padlet. So that's really encouraging to see the results. Okay. Thank you for answering that question. Now we'll move on to first year library instruction. Meggan?
Thanks, Ray. So what we're going to talk about now is some innovative lesson plans that you can implement in your first year library instruction classroom. Now, one thing we want you to remember is that any lesson plan that we talk about today or program or assessment activity can be adopted to meet your needs. As we're going to continually say throughout this hour, you need to remember who your students are and what works best from them. So when we were editing our cookbook, we received so many instruction proposals, and these are just 3 to highlight some very, what we found were really interesting and versatile lesson plans. And the first one has to do with Twitter. And I was always very hesitant to use Twitter in the classroom, but we've heard from a number of librarians, and I'm going to specifically comment on Jessica Burkhart from DeSales University. She has a lesson plan that encourages students to use Twitter hashtags to become familiar with metadata and database metadata and controlled vocabulary. And what she does is she has them search for, she has her students come into the library classroom, discuss a popular hashtag. I have some examples. You might not want to get too controversial, but something like alternative facts. I know many of us are working on fake news workshops, and this is a perfect activity. You can take a popular hashtag, talk about what metadata is available to you. What does this tweet say besides your hashtag? So who's tweeting it? What time are they tweeting it? What day are they tweeting it? Who's retweeting it? Etc. And then go into the databases and strategically search for factual information related to whatever topic you look at. You can do this in science classrooms, literature classrooms. It really can be adjusted to meet any classroom need. And I think that your students would probably find this very engaging.
That's a good point. Can I say something?
Yes, please.
I recently did a workshop using our President of the United States Twitter account and then his own personal, and having students use ProQuest to look up the newspapers that are countering his tweets too sometimes, or reinforcing it. And it's really interesting for students to see that kind of discord, but also to see that different sources could cover different needs and different outlets. So that's something that's really interesting, and I just wanted to bring that up because it just happened last week. And it also encourages students to look at the president's Twitter, because it's a lot of really important things that they need to look at. And I found out that a lot of first-year students aren't really interested in Twitter, or they don't have an account, they've never really used it, because it's a little bit different from their generation, which is more Snapchat, Instagram, so forth. But I think now they're seeing that there's actually potential.
Excellent. The next lesson plan I want to mention is called Scholars in Training, and this is a wonderful recipe from Jenny Yap and Sonia Robles from Berkeley City College. Now this lesson plan is designed for incoming students, maybe ESL composition courses or your first year composition courses. And this really gets back to what I think of as librarian basics. And that is, how do you evaluate a source? And they have this wonderful activity / game. They've gamified this activity where a stack of encyclopedias fell on the librarian's head, and all the students work in groups and are given envelopes with magnifying glasses, etc. And they're given scholarly sources and popular sources. And the students in their individual groups have to go through these materials and work like a detective and identify the materials in the envelope, and then have a discussion with their classmates and instructor about these materials. And it really gives students a hands-on experience to read and analyze scholarly journal articles, which I don't know about you, but I find my students sometimes read the abstract or read the intro. They take one sentence out of that article, and that's all they need. They don't want to actually evaluate a source. And I think this is going to become more and more important as we start integrating into more first-year courses, is to really evaluate our sources, or help students evaluate sources.
That's a great point. For me, I actually recently did a sort of like anatomy of a scholarly article where I cut the scholarly articles, 2 of them, in different pieces, and then I have students working groups to put the article back together. So like the introduction was separate, the abstract was separate, the literature review, so students could see the structure of the article. They would have to read it. Does that make sense? I think that it
that's wonderful.
Like hands-on approach, and then it's sort of like putting in the skeleton, but it's more like for the scholarly article.
Great. Really fun. And our last one, and you'll notice Ray and I are kind of big fans of gamification and trying to make your library activities a little more engaging. And the next activity is apple slices, and this comes from librarians at, what is that, JMU, and what happens is they created an apples to apples like game where students can work in small groups. They'll receive a stack of cards, and they're basically playing apples to apples, which we know a lot of our students like and to play. And so every student will get 5 cards, and then each student will rotate playing the judge to see which card matches best. And the librarian said that they had great response to this activity, and this is even something that you can extend this, and you can have students write their own library memes or something like that. So there's a lot of ways that you can take games and activities that students are very familiar with and just libraryify them.
That's a great one. I don't remember if we had a submission on Cards Against Humanity. Do you remember, Megan, if we had?
No. Mm-mm.
Well, yeah, but I must have read somewhere else that somebody else created one where it's Cards Against Librarians. So for those of you who are into board games, I recently just played this recently at this IRDL program. We just had a social, and it could be really interesting, and it could be very complex, but it's similar card games where you have students engage with one another and really gamify the library instruction to help them see that library instruction can be done differently, especially for those who have different kinds of attention span.
Excellent.
So we are up to...
Yeah, yep. Poll number 3. So we would just like to know, what department do you collaborate with the most with to support student engagement? And if you can't tell, we are asking a lot of poll questions because we'd like you to stay engaged, and we would like to hear from you so that we can better prepare ourselves for our talk at the ACRL at the Credo booth.
We have the following: Student Affairs, Writing Center, Center for First Year Experience, or some Office of First Year Experience, if you have some other group you participate with or collaborate with. But I don't collaborate with other departments, and that's okay. We're trying to just assess our audience, and some of the results we'll share with you right after this poll. Okay, so we have, wow, 19%. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I look forward to hearing what that other is.
Yes.
And I hope we can inspire those who don't collaborate with other departments to maybe step out of the library and engage with other departments.
Yes. Thank you for answering that poll. So one of the other elements we wanted to focus on is library programming and student engagement. So for those who engage with Student Affairs and Writing Center, great, keep it up. Collaboration is key for successful student engagement and programming. So beyond just faculty and students, there's also staff and administrators. And that's a great way to build the library's visibility and partnership, and really showing that the resources we have can really lift and support high-impact practices in terms of student retention, student success, but also really focusing on the library as a key partner, as the center for scholarly and active programming. So this is a great way to really demonstrate the library's value and commitment to student success and faculty and their research and teaching needs. So you just want to keep that in mind, because a lot of times, a lot of the librarians and libraries have to demonstrate assessment, which we'll talk about at the end, but really about their stories. What are they contributing to student success? And collaboration is key. And give you an example, we really building new ideas and synergies and experiment them throughout your outreach. So this is a good way to test new ideas out and facilitate new opportunities for the partners, but also for your students. So here's the example. How can libraries collaborate with the Office of Health and Wellness to design a series of de-stressing events during finals week? So everyone can probably assume you can do therapy dogs, you can bring in I think masseuse. I think some places do that with their physical therapy departments and gaming nights. We've done that where I've worked.
Coffee, donuts.
Yes, you can bring in these unhealthy treats to encourage their appetite, or you can do something even more fun, and this is something we're planning to do, the silent discos in the library. This is something where you bring in these Bluetooth headphones. Students can be putting them on, listening to music. There could be all kinds of great activities going on in the library. And this is sort of one way to go beyond the common practices, using technology and using space creatively. So that's something to keep in mind. I've been to a couple of these events on campus as well as other ones in conferences, and I find that it really lures people in because they can listen to whatever they want. They can change to different music and de-stress. Have you been to one of these, Meggan?
I have not been to a silent disco, but you know me, I would be in heaven to have a disco in the library.
Yeah. So we're up to poll number 4. And this is an interesting question on assessment.
So are you assessing first-year students? And this is a pretty simple question. You can just answer yes or no. We want to know what people are actually doing. Like I mentioned before, we have worked with Library Journal and Credo to collect feedback from librarians through the first-year experience survey. And I think you guys are going to find a lot of the assessment-related results extremely interesting. So we would just want to know who we're talking to and what you do. And while we're waiting to close that up, I just wanted to share some of our other responses from the last poll. So it looks like some of our participants collaborate with enrollment services, first-year biology and health science majors, and residence life. So that's really interesting. Thank you.
You know, I did read somewhere, I believe it was College and Research Libraries News, maybe a year or two ago, that some of the instruction librarians who take on first-year activities and instruction, they also serve as advisors. So that's really interesting. Academic librarians as academic advisors, because we see students regularly, and I see students regularly too, and in a sense that almost advising, because I have I'm the advisor for our Cambodian Student Association and Indonesian Student Club because they just need a faculty sponsor. And as I'm talking to the students, I'm actually hearing out, they're not necessarily first year, but just hearing out what they've been doing and where they plan to go. It's interesting. So the poll results, you want to say something about this, Meggan?
I did. My friend and frequent collaborator, Claire Wiley, I believe she recently wrote an article about this. She's at Belmont, and she serves as an academic advisor, and she really enjoys it. She thinks it's a very rewarding part of her job, these lasting connections with students, making you more approachable as a librarian if you get to know some of these students. And research actually shows that students who get to know faculty members on outside of the classroom tend to be more comfortable coming to them with questions. So I think that's really important.
Great. The poll results is that there's a lot of assessments going on. It's pretty divided, and it's something that everyone should be thinking about. We'll be giving you some ideas. Hopefully you can take back and have a discussion with your library team.
Yeah, excellent. And so we hope we're going to go over a few of what we saw as really innovative and progressive assessment activities. Now, a lot of librarians in the first year when they do assessment, it can start very simply. Pre and post tests, I know a lot of people are still doing formative assessment feedbacks in the classroom, things like that. But we wanted to show you some of what Ray and I would call more interesting, maybe something a little more rewarding that you can do to assess student learning and to help show library value. The first one comes from my dear friend and former colleague, Ilka Dadik at Nazareth College. And she wrote a lesson plan or an activity about how you can use ethnographic research methods to gain valuable information about worldviews and mental models of first-year students. And so what she suggests librarians do is basically a two-pronged, multi-tiered assessment project. And that would be to first survey incoming students right away, and then within the first month, hold some focus groups so you can ask students about their library experience and what they're expecting. So some sample questions would be, what was the library like in your previous school? How did you use the library? What expectations do you expect from this library? And what you can do then with this data, if you have some assistance, because I hate transcribing, but you can transcribe all of these interviews and use a software such as Atlas TI, a qualitative software analysis tool, to help you find common themes. And what you could do is then tailor your instruction and outreach programs to help meet your students' needs. So maybe you find that students are really uncomfortable with your space, or they don't understand what a library does. I mean, that happens a lot. Or what is a library? What do you do there? You can then tailor your programs to meet those needs.
I think that's a good point, particularly for those who are interested in international students. And you can find out that actually a lot of international students come from really supportive libraries, and it's just a little bit different from the U.S. context.
Mm-hmm. And I also find it interesting to think about what library tools students have used, how they're using them, things like that, if they've ever heard of a database, etc. Our second innovative assessment activity is a citation analysis project, also from Ilka. And this is a well-established method in library research that can be a very useful tool for assessing student work. But when you combine just a simple citation analysis program, again, with another research method, such as focus groups, it can help provide a rich picture of students' information literacy skills. So what do I mean by a citation analysis project? This could be something like combing through a bibliography, looking for, are students using library resources? Are they using old material, new material? What formats are they using and integrating into their papers? And that could be a whole other aspect. How are they integrating sources into their papers? Are they simply paraphrasing, quoting, etc.? Are they doing this properly? And again, it's going to help us see how our students are using these tools, integrating them into their research process, and then taking those resources and integrating them into their paper. And then once you get to the second step, which is the focus group, you can actually talk about students' experiences in the research process and how they integrated these resources into their papers. This can be very time-consuming, I know, but I think you would get a lot of rich data. We did this at NYU-Abu Dhabi last year. Ilka conducted this project, and we refer back to this data set all the time because we say this is how we as librarians think students use information, but this is our results of this study actually show they're using them this way. And it was a really enlightening experience.
Those are good points. I wanted to add that the quantitative versus qualitative approach Obviously, quantitative, we've done this many times, post, pre, as Meggan said, these surveys on Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, Google quizzes, or whatever. But I think the qualitative aspect can really demonstrate a lot about who our students are, where they could be heading, and really good storytelling for what it is that we do in the library to support student retention.
Exactly. And this is something that would actually be really interesting if you conducted it maybe every year or every other year on the same group of students to see how they've progressed over time. Now, our last assessment activity is really fun. And this comes from Myra Waddle from the University of Hawaii. And she talks about how you can use infographics to assess your information literacy instruction sessions. And how are we going to do this? I've seen infographics in a lot of freshman writing classes, etc. But how can we as librarians use these as a tool to see if students can demonstrate their learning? And so what she does is that she will often lead a discussion with students about, what are infographics, looking at good ones and bad ones, and then she turns it over to the students and has them lead peer discussions. And through this discussion, students reflect on infographics. What is good, what is bad, it creates conversation and debate, and then they actually go into the process, and this is actually, I should note, a multi-stage instruction session, so it happens normally over 2 to 3 one-shots. And students will actually create an infographic based on resources that they've found from library databases. So not only is the librarian engaging the students in discussion about infographics and ways to communicate information, but now students are able to go back to the resources that he or she taught them about how to evaluate information and find really good sources and then create their own infographic. And she says that she has a lot of success and a lot of debate because people are really interested in infographics and how you display information.
That's a great point. I also wanted to add that you can take this a step further. 2 ways. The first way is if you're embedded in a class and you're having students do an infographic like this, you can also bring students into the library and do maybe a poster session demonstrating their infographics open to the public and have people just come in and learn about the research that students are doing and have a discussion and really have the library be that sponsor, that space. And I know this is something that is a little bit different, but it's a good way to bring visibility of the library's engagement in this kind of coursework. And the second part is all the data you've been gathering, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, using infographics can really show visually what your library is doing to support first-year students. So I haven't done this yet, but I do plan to do it maybe at the end of this semester after collecting all the data or end of the year, putting it into an infographics to show the work that the library has been doing to support first-year experience and sharing it with campus partners.
That's great, Ray. That's a really, great way to communicate library statistics. Oftentimes I try to find people, in the hallways and all over campus and tell them, look at all of the success I've had in the classroom. But if I can actually visually show them, I bet I'm going to have a lot better results. I think one thing that sometimes librarians forget or maybe have a hard time is closing that loop and explaining to your campus the impact that the library has had on your students rather than just keeping it in-house. It's getting it out of the library. We know what we're doing in the library. Let's let our campus partners know what we're doing.
That's right. And so for the next few slides, we're just going to go over some of our favorite tools. They're all open source, free, and I'm sure most, if not all of you have heard of them, but for those who are not familiar, this is a good way to look at different kinds of instruction, assessment, and activities for library programs and services for students beyond just the first year. I thought this was a good way to just share. One of them is the ACRL Sandbox. I am part of the ACRL Info Framework Advisory Board where we meet and discuss how we can launch this sandbox. It just came out recently, It's a repository, a platform for sharing framework materials. For those of you who are interested in identifying or thinking of creative ways to apply ACRL framework into lesson plans for your instruction, this is the first stop you might want to get into. You can create an account, it's free, or you can just browse to see what's available and then just pick and choose and adapt. It's broken down by subject. So it just launched recently, so I just want to bring this attention to everybody. And we have Primo. Megan, do you want to say something about this?
I mean, you can, Ray.
Okay. So I'm familiar with this, just like most of you. I just wanted to say that it's another really good tool. They have, you can submit materials, find really good videos, tutorials, something that they keep in touch by the ACRL instruction section. So I just assumed it's all library instruction based, and it's really good stuff. So. And
it's peer reviewed, so one would assume, but obviously, as we all know, you cannot always trust peer review, but all materials and resources are peer reviewed, so hopefully they are high quality and they're going to help you in your classroom.
And then finally, we have Project Quora, which is the community of online research assignments. This recently won an award, I think by ACRL instruction section. So I know Susan Gardner from Loyola Marymount University was the lead for this. And it's an open source tool for faculty and librarians to find, share assignments, to collaborate, and it's similar to the Sandbox. However, this is just an open resource. So the Sandbox is more focused on framework. So if you're interested in framework, I would check that one. But I would encourage you to check both of them. This one too. They have different kinds of materials out there. Have you had a chance to explore this, Megan?
I have, and actually while I was preparing for our fake news workshop, they had an excellent fake news activity on there that I helped to model my workshop after.
That's great. I know they have one on conspiracy theory or pseudosciences. That's a big one too. Yeah, how do you replicate a science experiment? I mean, that's all over the news on NPR, New York Times. People are fudging the data, or the data is not just replicable. So there's some of that you can think about embedding in your first year science classes. Also in your writing classes, to really think quantitatively, qualitatively, and the whole context of misinformation. So coming to the end, we wanted to share these overall thoughts on academic libraries and the first year experience. As we said, you want to show value by collecting data. It could be summative, formative data, or assessments, all kinds to demonstrate the impact on student success, learning, retention, and transition. And you can do that through communicating your stories by sharing them, forming key partnerships, collaborations, and just demonstrating beyond collection development what we can do as first-year experienced librarians or instruction librarians that support first-year experience, really just thinking of how we can embed ourselves in the first-year program and identifying high-impact practices that is suitable for this kind of assessment. And finally, there's
also to, sorry to interrupt you, Ray, and to share with us. We're very lucky that Credo has been very supportive of our work and first-year experienced librarians by starting this conversation about our role in the library and student learning. And so we'd really like to hear from you to see what we can do in the future to better suit your needs.
Yep, and think outside the box, try new data assessment activities, share your data with all stakeholders so that they can see what's going on. I know here at Fresno State we do a lot of grades first, collecting data in terms of campus assessment. We also have something we've done, LibQual and sales, and so those are other really long strategic data collecting, but for something that's geared towards first years, you can think about some of the stuff we shared, but also all kinds of other techniques like focus groups or ethnographic studies and so forth. Anything else you want to add?
I think that's about it.
Okay, so for all of you who've stayed through this presentation, we want to share with you our upcoming book. It just came out in a Monday actually, or I told Megan I found out during the weekend, but but
Because not that they would update you via email.
No, you can put this discount code. It'll be available, I think, for 10% at starting on March 22nd, when ACRL kicks in, to May 5th. But if you want to purchase it right now and get it in and start applying them, go right ahead. It's available at the ALA website. There will be a press release shortly, but just to let you know, it just came out. And you can meet us at the ACRL conference. We'll both be there, and we'll be talking about the trends of FYE, but more specifically on the survey that was conducted by Library Journal. About 500 responses came in. So there's a lot of interesting things to talk about. If you're going to be there, you can meet us. If you have a book, we're happy to sign it too. We're happy to discuss some of the stuff we talked about in this presentation, as well as the content that you'll see. And there might be some surprises and giveaways too if you come to the booth. Megan, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes, so there's actually a bit.ly link right there to the information. We do have it on a website via Credo. So please feel free to take that link and use it later. Like Ray said, we're going to be going over the results of what is quite a big study, 500 responses, and I think that we got a lot of really fascinating results, and I think that between you and us that we are really going to make progress and better the first-year library experience.
Yeah, that's right, and we look forward to seeing you if you are coming, or if you can't make it, you'll see us somewhere, and you can just stop by and say hi. So that's really much the bulk of the presentation. We want to thank all of you for coming and Credo for sponsoring.
And we would love to hear some questions from you. 11 minutes, that's almost perfect. We wanted 10 to 15. So please feel free to ask us some questions.
Ray and Megan, I've been collecting those for you, so if you're ready, I'll shoot some questions over to you.
Great.
Thank you.
So first one, we have a librarian who has a typical problem of having about 20 minutes for orientation with first-year students. So she's curious to know how you would recommend scheduling and timing those 20 minutes and towards what topics.
I will say a few things first, Ray, if you don't mind. I used to be in this predicament where I was also given this 20 minutes for a library tour, and it's what I would refer to as spaces and faces. And anyone who works with me will pull out their jazz hands when I do that, because I want students to feel welcome in the library. But what I found is that, well, yes, it's welcoming. We're going over what is a library. Here's our services. Here are our people. We are here for you. Ask us questions in the future. I've actually been really thinking outside of the box about how can we better connect with students, maybe during their freshman orientation, etc. And so what we are going to do this upcoming year is our campus has a campus scavenger hunt. So in addition to meeting students through some of these more general library tours, orientation type things, they're also going to have very strategic questions that will take place in the library during their scavenger hunt. Now, this was just through a very informal partnership with Student Life. So while I encourage you to really think about, I think it's good that you're thinking about what do you want to cover in those 20 minutes, I would also think about how you can reach students beyond those 20 minutes. So what can you do well in those 20 minutes, and then how can you capture everything else you'd like to teach them or tell them in other ways?
Yeah, I would agree. Are there other questions, Olga?
There are, but if you have anything to add, please do, Ray.
I think for me, it's a challenge to create something that's sustainable and scalable, particularly for orientations. So last year, I had collaborated with several librarians and our videographer, who is a campus partner, to create a really dynamic video that just shows 10 key points about the library in 2 minutes. And I think that was showed throughout the summer for the orientations, and really, I for myself, wouldn't necessarily have to be there and just repeat the same thing, which I think most of you are probably doing. But I think that part people kind of turn off. I've observed, people, they just don't pay attention, when there's another person coming in. So what I do is show this video, well, they show it, and then we have another email exchange about how it went. But some of the points Meggan brought up, definitely think about the key points and not try to cover everything, because in your instruction sections you're going to cover a lot of stuff anyway.
Great. Next question is about an article that you mentioned. Can you advise where you found the article about academic librarians as advisors?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I can try to find it really quickly, but if my friend Claire was on here, she would be able to tell you. I'll find it, and when we send the follow-up link, can we put it in there?
Sure, yeah, and if we get it in time before the end of the webinar, we can push it out to everyone in the audience as well. So
okay,
let us know when you're able to find that.
Question, I'm going to try to find it.
Another question is about motivating first-year students. How would you suggest motivating these students when a lot of times they might see some of these ideas as extracurricular?
That's a great question. We know that first-year students, they don't have intrinsic motivation, not like grad students or seniors or juniors. And first-year students, based on the library journal, I'm just going to give you a little preview. A lot of the respondents said the first-year students are interested in a high GPA. That's all they're thinking about, which makes sense. So how do you motivate them beyond this? So that is something that I think requires a lot of conversations with the instructors and how you can really better support the first-year students. So one way is, Meggan alluded to, these focus groups, these kinds of having conversations with students and really understanding that why are they using the library and when do they use it and how do they use it. And if you are getting students who are already coming to the library, great. But to those that are not coming, you might, as a librarian, go out there and really talk to students and put that face into the library. That way it really creates that personal touch, so it's not just, oh, it's just a big building with lots of books. It's actually, there's a person who's interested and could be a resource, can guide you to the first year. But I think this is something that I think all of us are tackling with. Do you have any suggestions, Meggan?
I'm sorry, I wasn't really paying attention as much because I was to find that article, and I did find it, and I sent it to Olga, so she, I think, will push it out. I think it's an open access. So what was the question again?
Oh, it was about how do you motivate students, first-year students, and beyond this like extracurricular stuff, if I heard correctly.
Oh, that's, I think, the million-dollar question, isn't it? I really think just trying to engage with them and create meaningful experience. I used to be the type of librarian who thought if I was really peppy and motivated and at the front and, singing, dancing, etc., that I would really get more attention. But what I found is when I have really meaningful conversations and talk to them, they are adults, like adults. As budding scholars, tell me what you think about this source. What is the conversation? How is your research question going to add to this scholarly conversation about this topic? I've been really strategic about the language that I use in classes to try to keep students motivated.
Hopefully that's
Great.
something we'll be discussing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ray, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's all. Yeah.
Okay. So next question, just a tactical one. We have a guest that was wondering which programs librarians are using to create the infographics that you showed for info literacy assessment.
So I will say I think one of the most popular ones is PictoChart. Has anyone ever heard of this? There are different versions of PictoChart. There is a free, limited version, but you can pay for a bigger, more versatile package. Infogram is another tool, and Canva. There's a lot of different infographic tools out there, and I've actually even seen some schools using the Google Drive package to try to create infographics.
Yeah, I would agree with Megan. That's a good one, and I'm sure if you did a Google search, you might be able to find some other alternatives, but PictoChart is the one I use too.
Yeah, we've had several audience members also saying that they love PictoChart too, so that seems to be a clear winner. All right, let's go with one last question. Do you think librarians tend to focus too much on new technologies such as Kahoot and Padlet rather than on content?
That is a great question. Megan, did you want to go first?
Well, I think Ray and I might differ on this a little bit, just knowing our personalities. I'm actually scaling back on trying to incorporate the newest and latest technology into my classes. Something like Kahoot, I think, can add a lot of value, but I'm not really going above and beyond the call of duty to learn every new technology. And like I said, I'm really just trying to have meaningful conversations with my students and focus on student learning. I feel like sometimes in the library classroom, when we get in there and it's, okay, download this app and do this, I'm almost concentrating more on getting everyone to be able to use this tool than I am about teaching the content and having meaningful discussions. So yes, I do think that there can be technology overload. Even if you think about a workshop that you've been to, a library workshop, I've been to workshops where you're just always doing something with some sort of technology, and it takes away from the value of the workshop. So I do limit mine.
That's a great question. I, as Megan said, am more focused on not necessarily the latest technology and how do we apply it, but how do we enable and facilitate our teaching and learning in a way that is just beyond the traditional one-shot. In the survey, it says that many students are finding it dull, boring, and just not interested. So what I try to do is incorporate some of the tools, but encourage students to think, look, these tools are not really from the library. They can be used by you if you're interested in building your resume, knowing how to do a survey, or really for your clubs, for your activities. And of course, that's a long stretch, right? They don't actually think about that. But I think what's interesting is I also focus on things that are not technology heavy, because there is a technology fatigue. So one thing I did recently was I did a Pictionary game. So I had one student randomly draw a picture on a topic that was mentioned, and then everyone had to guess what it is using different keywords. And then that way, it was just a marker and a board, and then people were focused. They were having fun because I made the person who draw the picture blindfolded. So it was sort of like there's this sort of element that's like a little different, but then people are focused. And I think we have different students with different attention needs, and so we have to be mindful of that. And I am aware there is that technology fatigue, but it's going to be a struggle. You have to sort of find balance.
Great, and that takes us right to time. So thank you again so much, Ray and Megan. That was super engaging. I know folks appreciate it. We've had tons and tons of comments. So thank you everyone for joining us. Just a reminder, there will be a short survey that pops up on your screen once we end here. If you don't have a moment to do that now, we'd appreciate it if you give us some feedback via the email you'll receive. So thank you again, and hope to see some of you at ACRL. Bye-bye.